All right, welcome to today's masterclass all around gut healing and digestion with Laura Martin. I'm super excited for this because, as you will hear, digestion is really foundational to health, but like all areas, not just physical health, mental health, emotional health. And so, this is a prime focus that we need to really look at when it comes to PCOS, but also hormones and health in general. So, honestly, this is just really important knowledge for every single person, I believe, on the face of the planet because it all starts in the gut. So before I get Laura into her zone of genius and speaking her magic, I wanted to first introduce this topic and really connect it with PCOS because that's the majority of my listeners. They want to know, how does this affect PCOS? So when we're looking at a gut and why is it important to have a healthy gut, we're really looking at this barrier between the external world and ourselves. And it's really the first line of defense that we have against pathogens and anything that can come in. It's obviously also implicated in digestion. We know that it's going to really be where we absorb the nutrients and the fuel for our bodies. And then we also know that it contains the majority of our immune system, actually around 70% is in the gut. And it's also a direct connection to the brain. So when we look at like mood issues and brain issues, it's very much connected to the gut too. So it's even more important nowadays to nurture this because obviously immune function is really important, but also mental health, we're seeing a crisis there as well. The thing that's really cool though, which we're going to talk about, is that we have so much control over the state of our gut. And even cooler is just some research that actually has shown that you can shift your gut microbiome either favorably, which is what we want, or unfavorably in just 24 hours, depending on what you eat. So that is really profound. And it just means that we have so much power in what we choose and what we really consume and put into our bodies. So the connection with PCOS, I just want to get into a little bit because there is a very big connection. So PCOS is said to have two pathologic conditions, which are chronic state of inflammation and insulin resistance. Then we also see the stress response as well. Those are kind of the three types of PCOS. But when we're looking at chronic inflammation and insulin resistance in particular, they are both associated with a dysbiosis of the gut. So this means our gut is out of balance. We don't have enough good, basically bacteria in balance with the bad bacteria. Then PCOS women have also been shown to have a lower diversity in their gut microbiome than healthy, quote unquote, women or than the control group. And so this is really important because when we have a diverse amount of different bacteria, that's a really good sign of a healthy gut. Then we also have research that's showing that this hyperandrogen state, so when we have these high male sex hormones like testosterone and these symptoms like hirsutism, the acne, the hair loss, these are actually correlated with changes in the gut microbiome. And so when we have this dysbiosis in the gut, when it's out of balance in women with PCOS, it seems to be associated with the phenotypes too. And the phenotypes can determine what are your symptoms that come up, like how severe your PCOS is, because we know it's a spectrum. Not everyone has the same symptoms, not everyone has the same phenotype. But research is showing that your state of the gut can actually influence what kind of phenotype shows up for you. And so we're also seeing that insulin resistance, these sex hormone levels, and obesity may affect the diversity and the composition of the gut microbiome. I believe in everybody, but also this is just a study in PCOS women. And so the other thing I just want to mention in terms of the PCOS gut connection too is these testosterone levels and these overall high androgens that we don't want high because of these really annoying symptoms and this the pathogenesis. So these levels are also correlated with microbial diversity. And so the higher a woman's level of these hormones, of the androgens, the less diverse her gut microbiome will likely be. So again, it's just showing there's a huge connection between the state of our microbiome and the symptoms we have, the severity of our PCOS, the pathogenesis, all of that. So research is showing this now, which is quite amazing to have this research because even when we look at like the past 10 years, the research in the gut microbiome is just astonishing. And especially when it comes to PCOS, we just need a lot more research there. And it's showing that the gut connection is huge. The last thing I want to touch on, which I know we'll touch on more in this masterclass, is the IBS PCOS connection, because this is also something that is very prevalent and it's very frustrating. And even there can be a lot of shame around it, and even just asking for help around this or saying that you experience this, because around 30 to 40% of women with PCOS also have IBS. So that's a large amount. So it's very, very common, and you're not alone if you experience this. IBS is more common in PCOS than the general population because these two conditions share one major root cause, which is dysbiosis, which I just talked about before. The state of our gut when it's out of balance will definitely impact the severity of our PCOS. And then, of course, that will impact our digestive symptoms too, because the state of our gut is really everything, not just for our digestive symptoms, but everything else. And so when we look at women with PCOS specifically, we have been shown to experience higher cortisol levels, as well as this circadian rhythm dysregulation, higher testosterone levels, lack of microbial diversity, and all of these things compounded can contribute to gut dysfunction. And even just one of these things, dysbiosis and even intestinal permeability, which is also coined as leaky gut. And that's just going to create a chronic state of inflammation, which can just worsen all of these symptoms. And so what I really want to emphasize, and I think this will be emphasized too today, is that it doesn't matter if you experience digestive symptoms, if they're obvious or not, like constipation, diarrhea, bloating. The gut must always be addressed, because it doesn't mean that you don't have any issues there. And even if, for instance, your gut was in perfect shape, which I don't think that's ever possible to reach like the perfect state of health, you always want to be supporting it all the time. Like it's something we always need to be nurturing. And so this is why it's something that should always be addressed within your diet and your lifestyle and your day-to-day habits. And so any sort of dysfunction will affect all systems of the body, including your PCOS symptoms. And so when we're looking at the PCOS IBS connection, we see that a state of dysbiosis can increase inflammation, it can increase insulin resistance, it can increase these androgens, and these are all underlying triggers to PCOS symptoms and the PCOS pathogenesis. So really, gut healing must always be part of the protocol, quote unquote, especially if you have PCOS. It cannot be ignored. And this is something that I went the long route. I kind of didn't really start there. I was really just looking at, a pill for every ill. Okay, I had acne, take this pill. I had this, take this pill, whatever. And it wasn't until I actually started to really focus on the gut. And that took a matter of months and years to actually get to a place that my gut was healing and I could actually tolerate more foods and I didn't bloat all the time. That's where really things started to shift for me. So it really has to start there. And one last thing I want to know before I hand it over to Laura is something we don't really talk about, especially within the conventional model, of course, because this isn't always recognized, is that metformin, which is a common drug that's prescribed for PCOS, specifically for insulin resistance, as well as hormonal birth control, which is very highly prescribed for basically all hormonal symptoms. They're actually shown to disrupt and damage the gut and the microbiome. And so there are many alternatives, fortunately, if you do want to look for something else. And even if you do decide to take these drugs for whatever reason, there is also a way that you can support yourself there. For me, I really think that we need to be educated on this, because even if you do decide to take these drugs or whatever, that's fine. I think we all should have that choice, but it's really about being educated. Like, how are these impacting me and how can I support myself? Because a lot of the time, especially if we're taking these for years, there can be a lot of damage done. So this is why we really need to be educated and look at what are we putting in our bodies and how can we support ourselves and really getting the support that we need for gut health. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to let Laura take it from there, but I hope that was a good little introduction and really to get you guys thinking about how the gut impacts PCOS and really just on a systemic level.
I love that. You hit so many things. I just kept nodding. I'm like, yes. I love it. But yeah, so my name is Laura Patricia Martin. I'm the founder of Healing to Happy, and I specialize in the gut brain connection to help women with IBS, anxiety, which I think we could just relate to. Like, even if you don't have, like, quote unquote, like the panic attack anxiety, I feel like with chronic food sensitivities, health issues, you just become anxious around food and it becomes this thing that you're like, I can't eat normally. What do I do? And so the big thing about gut health and really understanding it is, one, understanding it and why it's important. The biggest thing about what you touched on was, it controls everything about us, beyond just digesting our food, which is oftentimes the only thing we think of. It controls our sleep, it controls our hormones, it controls our sex drive, it controls the way we respond to stress. It controls our moods, our skin, our hair, our nails, our libido. Like, every single thing about us could be like stemmed in the gut. And so when we work our way out, which I did the same thing, I had all the health issues. I had, hypothyroidism. I had IBS. I had anxiety, depression. My cycle was missing for 5 years, and still I didn't necessarily, like, I was looking at gut health, but more from the elimination, restriction, foods the issue kind of problem. I didn't understand that IBS is a nervous system issue. And something that you touched on was cortisol. And that's at the root what's happening in our body. Somewhere, something along the line set off this cortisol response, which shut down the vagus nerve, which I'll explain in a second, which then stopped combating inflammation that then led to all these health issues, whether it's an autoimmunity, whether it's just general stinky gas, whether it's inconsistent bowel movements, whether it's PCOS. All these things stemmed from something deeper. It wasn't just this happened and that's it. There's a cycle. There's a series of events that led up to that. So I touched on something called like the vagus nerve. So we've heard like our gut is called our second brain and things like that. And that's because our gut is in constant communication with our brain through this thing called the vagus nerve. It's our longest cranial nerve. It goes from our brainstem to our gut, and it gives off these action potentials. And so it runs through this thing called the enteric nervous system, which is one of the reasons it's called our second brain. It runs entirely on its own. Like, you don't have to tell your heart to beat, your food to digest, your lungs to breathe, any of that stuff. Down. The other reason is we have as many neurotransmitters in our gut lining as our brain. Here's the thing about TikTok and whatever it's called. I almost call it Pinterest, but also Pinterest probably, but I don't use it. Instagram, is that there's this confusion that, we have serotonin in our gut and it's our happy hormone. So we have 90% of it in our gut. So this is how we eat to get happy. That's not true. Like, the serotonin in our gut is actually stemmed from stress. So we can have too much or too little stress in our gut, which is why you would get prescribed an SSRI for leaky gut or constipation or diarrhea, things like that. They're trying to control the stress responses in your gut. It doesn't necessarily go to your brain, but it does control the inflammation that's happening in your brain. And that inflammation that's happening in your brain is setting off alarm responses in your gut because of this vagus nerve. Does that make sense? Like, it's this whole neural network that's happening inside of us. And so when people are struggling with, say, dysbiosis and inflammation and all this kind of stuff, it's so much more than just, let's go on a low FODMAP diet or cut out gluten or cut out dairy and do this whole thing, which I didn't know, right? Like, I was on like low FODMAP for who even freaking knows, like, so long. And then like did keto and then did all these elimination diets. And at the time of my life, like, I was cut out 13 different food groups, was only eating soups and salads. And I was wondering why my gut wasn't healing. And it's like, just because you're eliminating more foods, you're not addressing the root issue. And the root issue is always gut-brain dysregulation and metabolic restoration. Like, for some reason, the internal thermostat that you have in your body, you're like, I don't know, the hot tub of your belly, the stomach acid, it somehow got super lukewarm, and no one likes to sit in a lukewarm hot tub. Like, it's not even fun. And so what's happening in your body is that the pathogens, the bacteria, the yeast, the things that we all naturally have now went, whoa, let's have a party, and like blew up. And then it broke through that blood-brain barrier because the vagus nerve isn't working. So that increased which is what holds your gut and the permeability together. But if it's not running optimally because of stress, because of trauma, because of malnourishment, because of some type of inflammatory food, because some type of infection, it stops functioning. Now all these foods are breaking the blood-brain barrier. You touched on that, the leaky gut. Exactly what
Mhm.
it sounds like. You're just the food particles that are supposed to be consumed and then turned into fuel and give you the right enzymes and minerals and things that you need to go to certain organs to really process everything is now breaking the blood-brain barrier, and it's like a bouncer at the party being like, what the heck, how'd you get in? Like it doesn't want you there. And the inflammation, because the vagus nerve isn't functionally optimally, it can't go tell them to leave. It's just like, okay, yeah, like run, do whatever. And it's like the kids
Mhm.
and the parents are out of town and you're in high school and it's like throwing a party. It's this whole thing. And so
Yeah. So
that's
there's
what's
two things I wanted to
happening.
address there
Yeah,
because I think this is so important. And I just love what you're saying. It's so important. I think we also do have a similar, I guess, experience. And I think a lot of people are going through this with like the restriction and elimination. I fell into that too. For like, I would say almost 3 years. I was like being super strict. I was eliminating all the foods. I even remember like I'm still traumatized to this day that I avoided eggs for 3 years because I'm
same.
obsessed with eggs. And yeah. And so I did this. I eliminated all these foods, the healthy foods too, the ones, and I just kept doing the test. And I'm like, oh, now I'm reacting to broccoli. Now I'm reacting to this. And like it's not unhealthy foods, right? And so gluten, dairy, and eggs were like top three. I don't really do dairy or gluten anyway now, but that's fine. I don't care. But the thing is now I'm at a point where even if I did eat them, it's not the same reaction. So for
Exactly.
me, it was I think we all fall into this where we think that we just need to avoid everything and then we'll be okay. But the thing is, if you don't address, again, like you said, like the gut, if you don't actually heal that, then if you reintroduce the food, you likely won't be able to eat it. And so this can go on for years. And we don't want you to be in such a restrictive place for years because not only does that suck, but it's also damaging because you're also putting yourself at risk for nutrient deficiencies, right? So that was the first point I wanted to bring up. If you, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but I think it's so dangerous to get stuck in there that we need to focus on. Yes, there might be things we need to remove. Obviously, the obvious offenders of like processed foods, junk food, that kind of thing, and then sensitive foods. But we really can't get stuck there because we need to focus on the nourishment at the same time, right?
Exactly. And you touched on something that I kind of want to break down because even food sensitivity has become such a marketing scam. Food sensitivity kits, please stop doing them. You cannot test things from your blood in your home. That does not work. Like that even sounds bonkers to me as to why we would do it. And then we get this whole list of like red and green foods, and you're like, oh my God, it's everything I eat.
Yeah.
Because that's a normal human reaction. You're supposed to have an immunoglobulin G response. That's normal. All of our bodies do it. If you have digestive issues, it's just that you feel it more. It's still a healthy human response that you're giving off a gas because your body is breaking down food to now use as fuel. That makes sense. It's not like you just eat a broccoli and all of a sudden it's magic. Like your body has to do a whole bunch of work to break that
Yeah.
down and use energy. Like we can't, this whole sensitivity thing, we like live by them and then we fear it in this whole thing. And like sensitivities, I'm not saying like if you get heartburn every time you eat something, continue doing it. Please stop doing that. Like your body is telling you this ain't working for me, honey.
Well, that's also
But
a different approach to instead of yeah, because the sensitivity test, not only are they so expensive, but they're highly inaccurate. For
yeah,
me, it's like an elimination diet or even seeing eliminating certain foods. Like for instance, if you think I'm reacting to this food and then you're like, oh, actually, yeah, my body's giving me feedback. That food is not working for me, at least now, or maybe for long periods, right?
exactly. And like for me, like I couldn't eat anything at that point because picture it like you go to the gym and you want to pick up that 100-pound weight over there. You don't just go to the gym and pick up the weight. You're gonna hurt yourself. Like that doesn't work. You need to work on your muscle growth, right? Like you tear the muscle, it hurts a little bit, and then you keep going until all of a sudden your muscles are big enough. You pick up that thing and you're like, oh, I'm the Hulk. That is your microbiome and the diversity of your gut. But what we do is the opposite. We go, okay, so I am usually starts with gluten and dairy, right? So I am going to cut out gluten because Miley Cyrus is gluten free, and I'm going to do that because we all started there. Let's be honest. So we cut it out. And we're like, wow, okay, like I have energy, and then we're like, okay, and all of a sudden we're like being more aware, and we're like, oh, maybe dairy. Like I read, I have this pimple right here, so maybe it's dairy, and so we cut out dairy, and then all of a sudden it's like we get to like eggs and shellfish and legumes and nightshade. And you're like, I didn't even know what a nightshade was 3 months ago. Why am I cutting this out of my diet? We get to this point that because we're only eating quote unquote these green foods, which is usually like 6 foods, We have zero diversity in our microbiome, which doesn't give off butyrate, which is a short chain fatty acid that we need for our body to repair that gut lining. But we're too busy sticking to our safe foods and stressing about it. So we're like that gut brain connection, like it's not working out. And so now our body's getting even more sensitive. And then we go and we're like, maybe I'm better. And we go and we eat like a morsel of cheese and our body's like, bah, and it freaks out at us. And that's because you haven't trained that muscle. You just tried to go to the gym and pick up 100-pound weight when you cut back and you literally just cut out all the foods and went to the gym, and you haven't been in the gym in 1 year. Like you can't do that. You have to be able to work your way up. And this is why it's so important is, yes, if something's burning you and like hurting you and whatever, take it out of your nutrition routine for like max a month. Like don't keep it out of your thing, but also do the thing of how do we diversify your gut? How do we build things up? And really not even diversity right away. How do we neutralize your nervous system so that you're okay around food again, so that your liver can start functioning optimally, so that your thyroid can be doing the right thing, so your adrenals can calm down, so the temperature of your body can elevate to bring the food into your system. Like that's what we have to work on. It doesn't have to do with cutting out these foods. I never do that stuff because I have a history of an eating disorder for a decade. I'm not going to teach anyone what I personally find triggering, So I'm not going to put someone on an elimination diet. I'm going to tell you about the organ meats you should be eating and the root vegetables and the carbs and the things we need to be adding in. I never speak of it because naturally when you're getting more of that stuff, you're like, yeah, I really don't want that like pizza. Like, and don't get me wrong, I'm dating a New Yorker. He loves his freaking pizza. But it's like, it's one of those things that you're like, sometimes like once you know how good it feels to feel good, it's not as tempting anymore. And you also see that like you can, like you said earlier, like you can have gluten and dairy from time to time. Your body's fine because you did the work of laying the foundation. If we keep building these things on top of unstable foundations, we'll only get trapped in an elimination cycle. And every 2 weeks, we're more sensitive to something else. And then we keep trying different diets, but with different names. And we think it's us. We think it's us not being strict enough. We think it's us not being dedicated enough. We think it's us not being disciplined enough. It has nothing to do with us. It has to do with the fact that you haven't done the work to figure out what the foundational issue is, whether it's an infection or things like that, or it's just a metabolism issue. We got to start there, and then we can start to play around with stuff. But it really, like, we got to neutralize our relationship around food with this stuff. That's the core of everything.
100%. And I'd love to get your input, your opinion, your approach to histamine, because I think this is something I also dealt with. I think if you have like a very unhealthy dysbiotic gut, histamine is likely going to be an issue at one point. And this is where it can even be more difficult because like you've seen the list of histamine foods. Like it's like avocados, like that is so difficult for me to. So anyways, there are a lot of foods that can be histamine producing and triggering. And so I think during a specific time, it's probably very important to be stricter. But again, as you mentioned, not for too long. So do you have any, like, what's your opinion about that?
Yeah, and same thing with histamines. I have the same approach with any intolerance, right? So whether it's histamine intolerance or lactose intolerance, it's the same thing as a sensitivity. Like it's just a thing. Don't eat it because it hurts you now, but also do the work. It's a copper deficiency. That's what histamine is. Figure out how to get copper into your body. Watch the histamine intolerance go down. That's how that works. And we got to get your liver to be detoxing optimally. Because if your liver isn't detoxing optimally, which is your main organ of detoxification, it's going to then recycle it into your system, and your body's going to be like, "Excuse me, miss, let's make you bright red and itchy. Here you go." And it sends you on this thing, and it's like we're too busy demonizing histamine foods and all this kind of stuff, and we're not looking at like, okay, so what happened along the way that my organs stopped working, and that now this is an issue. Okay, so what minerals causes histamine intolerance? Okay, so it's vitamin K, vitamin E, copper, all these kind of things. Okay, so how do I get them back into my diet? All right, so usually it's like liver, organ meats, getting these things back in, maybe taking, some oysters once a week, something, like getting the multivitamins in. I'm not talking about like going and spending a fortune on supplements. I'm really looking at like natural food sources that are nutrient dense to get them into our body, and then play around with adding histamine back in. It's never like, you can never have an avocado again. Like that doesn't exist. It's just get your body into states of homeostasis, replenish the organs, replenish the nutrients that went missing to give you the histamine, give you the intolerance, whatever it is. And then you get to rebuild it and you're fine. You're always fine.
I love that because I think a lot of the time we look at, again, which can be helpful too, like the DAO enzyme, like for instance, the B
Yeah.
vitamins could be helpful, but copper, I don't think I've heard anybody talk about that.
Really?
And that's something that I think a lot of people can get really, like, for instance, with supplementing, I'm wary about that because again, like copper toxicity is also like an
Huge.
issue, right? And so for you, is your approach more with the diet? Do you test copper?
No, it's always with the diet. You can tell. Like for me, I don't test, right? Like it's usually they've run the rat race and I don't need any more tests by the time they come to work with me. I'm
Yeah.
like, we're good. It's really you just look at their symptoms, right? Like I know histamine has to do with the fact that it's usually copper, the B vitamins, things like that, vitamin K, things like that. And I'm starting for me, a huge thing in my practice is using organ meats. What do we need to
Mm,
support? What animal organ do we need to consume to get us there? I don't necessarily believe in taking all these supplements. You're going to pee them out anyways because your digestive system isn't working. Like that is just the way that works. If you're eating an animal product, which by the way, like I don't like eating them, they do sell like little capsules
yeah.
things, and then they also make them now, which I thought I was saying this on a panel the other day, and they're like, they like grind it up into the meat now, and you can buy it that way. I was like, I just got to America, I have no idea. Like, but apparently you can do it that way. But like you can get it through foods where it's like beans, nuts, potatoes, like root vegetables, things like that. We're just looking at a diverse diet. I'm not saying like go ham and potatoes and eat
Mhm.
87 potatoes tomorrow. It's just
Yeah.
how can we add this more into your diet so you can feel more
Yes.
zazzy? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I love that because I think variety is key, especially if you are doing a lot of sensitivities. Like, if you keep eating the same thing day after day after day, like for me too, like eggs, like I will eat them now, but I don't eat them like all day, every day. Like I'll take breaks because I also, I think it's important to have a variety and shift your diet and also reduce the likelihood of reacting to that food. But one thing I know you touched on, but we didn't dive into it that I am just like, been preaching since I graduated from nutrition school because it's something I'm so frustrated about because in the conventional world, it's just not seen the same way is stomach acid, where for the most part, what I see is low stomach acid, but
Yeah.
most people think that they're actually too high. Do you
Mhm.
want to dive into that?
Yes. So this is a huge thing with my ladies with GERD and acid reflux. And holy pickles, if one more person tells me high stomach acid, I'm gonna be like, that literally happens with maybe 5% of the population. I think like hardly anyone actually has that, but so many people have acid reflux. Acid reflux is because you have a good amount of stomach acid, but what actually is a problem is that mucus layer around your gut is weak and your esophagus sphincter, fun to say, weak and damaged. That is why you're feeling the acid. It has nothing to do with you having too much acid. And these things are caused by inflammation, by stress, by environmental toxin, by the things that I'm sure you guys are learning about all the freaking time. It's just our everyday life and eating too much, eating not enough. Like your body's going to start to eat itself in those processes. And it usually is the gut lining that happens. And so it's not that our stomach acid is like this thing and we need to take these PPIs and we're actually making things so much worse. Trying to do it. Please stop taking it. Like, I get it. It hurts. Take aloe vera. Like, just trust me on this one because what you're doing is actually prolonging the damage because these over the counter medications, which you touched on earlier, of people taking medications for PCOS and things like that. The reason being is there's short-term management. That's how this current place that we live in, the healthcare system is about like management until it becomes unmanageable. And then you definitely need us. And it's this whole system. And I have nothing wrong with it. We need them for immediate care, but it's not about prevention. And so these medications aren't about prevention, they're about maintenance. And what happens is they come into your body and they lower the temperature of your internal thermostat, which weakens that gut layer and just makes everything longer in the process. So I totally get it. It hurts, it burns, it's all these things. And I'm not saying you have to stop it right away. It's just one of those things that now you have this information, you know better, now do a little bit better. Can you get aloe vera? Can you watch your eating style? Are you actually chewing your food all the way? Are you slowing down while you eat? Are you hunched over while you eat? Do you sit up? Do you stand at your kitchen counter and eat? Or do you actually sit down? Like, look at your eating techniques, look at your stress levels, look at the style of the foods that you're eating, then move forward from there. And I bet you that acid reflux goes away. Just bet you.
Yes. And I think The meal hygiene is, I literally preach this like every single client. I'm just like, meal hygiene, meal like, and then people are just like, what? Like, that's not gonna make a difference. They start doing it and they're like, holy shit. Like, it's just
Exactly.
so simple because I remember the first nutritionist I met who influenced me to go into nutrition school. He was like, you need to chew your food, meal hygiene, right? And I was like, what is this like weird thing? Like, it's just so foreign to us now, right? And I started to do it. And I didn't realize, like, I literally before swallowed my food like whole. No wonder, like, we don't have teeth in our stomachs, right? Like, yes, we have stomach acid, we have enzymes, but our teeth are there for a reason and
Mhm.
to really help the rest of the process. And so I think, first of all, I think a lot of people underestimate what meal hygiene can do for you. It's also one of the most quote unquote difficult things to do because it takes reprogramming and shifting your habits. But once you do it more and more, like before, I used to finish my meals before anybody else. And now everyone is always waiting for me to finish my meal. And like my parents will make fun of, well, my dad will make fun of me, like, oh, like it's the cow eating her meal or whatever, because I'm just like so slow. And I'm just like, yeah, I just retrained myself. So it's a learning curve. And then the last thing I want to say is I've had people say, well, when they're working this really like stressful job and they're just working like more than like 8 hours, 12 hours a day, they don't really have a break. What do you say to those people who are literally like, I don't even have time to sit down and like chew my food?
Do the best you can with the tools that you're given. I work with a lot of CFOs and CEOs, and the thing is, we all legally should be getting an hour, but I know that ain't the case. So, can you breathe into your belly before you slam that bagel as you run to your meeting? Like, how can you level this up a little bit? I'm not saying, like, I'm even the worst at this. If I'm in between calls, I'm like this morning, I called all morning. I ate my breakfast in front of my laptop and I was like, yo, sometimes this happens, but this is not a regular occurrence. Like, I'm going to be the first one to like guilt myself into this, being like, yo, we're busy. This just happens sometimes. But you know what I did? I took 40 belly breaths into my belly while I was eating and I made sure it's slow. I'm not like slamming it into my mouth before I'm doing something. I'm like, okay, like we can work, we can like make this process as doable as it can. But like oftentimes it's like we're slamming it into our mouth as we think we're in a rush to something somewhere. And it's like, well, your health is already telling you she's not happy. Which one do you want to catch up to you? Like, is it really worth that? Can you really just take 5 extra minutes to take 4 breaths and like eat a little bit slower? Or do you want to keep having these conversations year after year after year after year? Because your health is not going to change unless you do. That's the way it works. So
I
figure
just
it out.
love this conversation because it's just so real. And it's also just like, I just keep taking notes because I'm like, okay, now I have a question about this because I know so many people need to hear this. And I also know like I can hear like the people who need to listen to this, like what they're going to ask. And also I can just like hear like my past self be like, oh yes, like, you know what I mean? So when you're talking about this, I love that you're saying that like do what you can, because I think a lot of the time we look at, well, I need to cut out this, I need to do that, and I need to do that. And then we're like, oh my God, it's overwhelming. Like there's 10, 25 things to do. Whereas like maybe you take a deep breath, maybe you like do something relaxing for like five minutes, like listen to like good music. Maybe you sit down, maybe that's the thing. Maybe you literally just chew your food 2 more bites than usual. Like it literally can be a little thing. It doesn't have to be like a crazy thing. And just like adding in 1 or 2 things, like maybe it's sitting down today and no computer, or maybe it's sitting down and again the belly breath, or maybe you can't sit down and you literally do the breathing, or you eat something that's a little more digestible like a soup or something, right? So it's like adding those little things. And I think it's really important. What I want to get into is shifting your state into the parasympathetic. And I'd love for you to explain why that's so important. I think we just addressed like what you can do, but even if you want to mention that, why is it so important to shift our state into the parasympathetic, specifically around meals?
Yeah. So what I touched on earlier, because of that vagus nerve and the enteric nervous system, our blood flow, if we think our body doesn't know the difference between imminent trouble and stress and I have a deadline by the end of the day. Our body doesn't know that, you know? And when we're in and in trouble, our blood flow needs to go to our muscles. You know those moms that flip cars when their babies are under it? That happens because of this system, right? Like we get the strength, this blood flow, this whole adrenaline thing is happening in our body. Even if we don't feel we can actually go flip a car, that's what's happening inside of our body. And the things that don't need to be used don't get blood flow. So what's shut down is our reproductive, our libido, and digestion. And so if we're sitting here stressed out about something and worried, and we don't have stress, right? But we can take radical responsibility for the story and the compounded emotion that we feel in these moments. We're in these moments, our blood flow isn't going to our digestion. So you are basically chewing your food half chewed into this lukewarm hot tub where it sits and then sees a hole and it swims through, and then it gets this alarm response, and then it's sending off inflammation into your brain and the rest of your body. And now you're even more stressed and you're more anxious. And it's this perpetual cycle where it's like, if you just rest for a second, like breathe, it even feels good when you just do it now. Like you don't even have to be doing anything. It's just like, it just calms you straight down. And this helps your blood flow go to the places that it doesn't necessarily need, but your body does need to have it. And so it brings it there so that you can actually break down the food and get things going through and use the nutrients.
Nailed it. I love it. Yeah, so important. And again, it's just like, I think a lot of the time we're like, okay, what are the 10 supplements I need to take? What's the new diet protocol that's super fancy and the superfoods? And then like, we're also like, so much money is spent. Maybe it's more productive to do like 1 or 2 supplements and actually like focus on the meal hygiene, right?
Exactly.
It's like I think the lifestyle stuff is just so underrated because we're like, no, it also takes effort, right? So, I mean, sometimes we want to avoid that and it's just easier to take a pill, but then we're not actually addressing why it's out of balance. Because for me, it's really looking at what's your root cause imbalances. And also we need to address the foundations to health across the board, because if someone's not eating properly, they're not, activating their parasympathetic state, they're not moving their body. These are all things that we can't out supplement. We can't out diet. Like these are things that our body, literally every single person needs to address it. Right.
Exactly. Something like in Healing to Happy, where we talk, it's always a triangle, because mindset is the first one, right? Like you learned everything you know from the people you've surrounded yourself up until this point. And then it's lifestyle, and then it's nutrition. But you can't have these two if the bottom ain't complete. And like the mindset is the biggest thing over even lifestyle. It's like, do you actually take radical responsibility for your health? Like, are you actually ready to do that? Or are you going to keep trying these different modalities and these different things and these quick fixes? Or are you ready to challenge everything that you've known? Because this is technically like new science, right? Like I even look at my parents and I'm like, being home with them, I'm like, you are such a giant trigger. Like they're like, they take like handfuls of supplements and superfoods, and they're like, they go on these prolonged fasts and they do all this stuff. And I'm like, yo, you guys wonder why I had an eating disorder. Like, what the heck? Like, this stuff didn't even exist when I was a kid. But to think if you're this way at 59, how are you when I was like 4? Like, this had to be a continuous thing y'all were doing, where you thought a medication would fix you. And like the conversations I have with my dad, where he's like on his statins and he's on this stuff and he's like convinced these medications and this Prolon and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, it just runs in our family. And I go, have I literally taught you nothing? Like, and he's like, we all have hormone issues. We all like thyroid issues. We all have these. And I go, I don't. Like, I did, but I don't. Is that not enough for you to start listening to your glory child over here? Or are you going to keep going on this thing? And he's like, like, this is just, it runs in our family. And I'm like, I really hate that notion. And it gets people stuck on the medications, and it gets people quick on these quick fixes and these like certain type of workouts that if your body is screaming at you because you have something that's chronic. I'm not talking about just the occasional bloating or something like that, or like an occasional pimple, but if you have like PCOS, if you have anxiety, if you have IBS, like your body is asking you for love. A pill is not going to fix that. A fast, an elimination diet, a thing like that's not going to do it. It's the mindset of, what the heck was I doing my whole life that got me here? And how do I take radical responsibility on that?
So many things, and I can relate so much. And I think that's a very dangerous place when we attach, even I talk about this all the time with PCOS, but this could be any condition. When we attach to a diagnosis is important, but when we over-identify with it, I fell into this trap. I see this all the time. And I actually did a post on this where I just hear people and, doctors say, well, oh, we found the cause, it's PCOS. but that's not the cause. It's PCOS literally says like it's a collection of signs and symptoms. It's a syndrome, but the cause is our lifestyle, our diet, like even emotional trauma, our subconscious beliefs, like our stress, the way we live our lives. That's the root cause. And that can show up like dysbiosis, inflammation, nutrient, like all of these things we need to address. And so, like you mentioned, it's your body saying, wake up, please, like look at me. And so that's why if we say something is a cause, like PCOS is a cause, we wouldn't be able to reverse symptoms, which we can because we get to the root cause, if that makes sense. And so for me, it's also really disempowering, but also very clever to get people just saying, you know, it's genetic, whatever, like this is basically not something I get rid of, because then we're hooked on medications too. You know, that's a huge industry. Where was I going with this? Just had a brain fart. But yeah, so and that, yeah, the thing is 5% of diseases are genetic. It's only the genetics only play a 5% role in any disease. That's actually been proven. And that's so empowering because that means 95% is due to epigenetics, which basically is the environment, the way we live our lives, what we put in our body, that changes how our genes express themselves. That is super empowering and motivating. And it's just like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it also means you have to take, as you mentioned, radical responsibility for your health. And this is where I hear a lot of people say, like, I had somebody say the other day, oh, you know, hormonal imbalances and everything, you know, they're just the way of life. Like if we're women, we just have to put up with them. And same thing, I think, for digestive symptoms, like we just have to put up with it, whether that's because I'm a woman, whether that's because my family had it. And it's just total bullshit because it's just super disempowering and it's not the truth. But I think a lot of us just grow up thinking that until we realize, oh, it's not actually true.
Exactly. And one of the biggest things, I was saying it on my live earlier, where we often say it runs in my family because we learn how to eat from our family. We learn how to emotionally respond to things from our family. We learn our fitness levels from our family. That's actually what runs in your family. Yes, like with epigenetics, you need the gene, sure, but you also need the gut permeability that goes through it, which comes from lifestyle choices, and then the inflammatory response, which sets it off. You know, you get to control how that light switch works. And if you want to do the whole it runs in my family thing, it's really like, well, actually, you know, those things that you don't like about your parenting, how many times does that show up in your life? And how do you respond to things? And how do you actually learn how to eat? And what are you normally cooking? And how are you normally eating? Do you know, like I noticed the difference between my partner and I, right? Like we just, I mean, not just, but dating and things. It's noticing he likes to eat, he loves eating in the cart, and it drives me absolutely bananas. Like I hate it. And he's like, we've always done that. Or like I'll be cooking breakfast and he'll like come into the kitchen and he'll like take something and eat it while I'm cooking. And I'm like, huh, who taught you that? Like, what are you, an animal? You eat standing up in the kitchen and you just eat, we don't eat together. Like this isn't a communion thing. And he's like, we've just always done that. And I'm like, now being in this field, I'm like, how interesting. Because he used to, before we started dating, he used to be lactose intolerant and have all these gut issues and all this kind of stuff. And now this man just is like yappering off of all this gut health stuff where he's like, I just thought this was all normal. And now like I can eat cheese and it's totally fine. Of course, he's happy as a New Yorker and his pizza, he can eat cheese now. And it's one of these things where I'm like, it was simply his just lifestyle choices, where it's like eating on the go, eating fast food, not learning how to cook. And now it's like, as we've, not that he's my client, but he's in a relationship with me, so he sees how I live my life. He's learning new lessons, and it's so interesting because it's like it doesn't run in your family. Your habits run in your family. That's it.
And that's also just asking yourself a question like, okay, does it have to continue to run in my family? Because it's literally just a choice, right? And also maybe looking at, well, is it benefiting me by running in my family? Like, do I still want it to run in my future family? You know what I mean? Because we will pass down those habits. And so it's just about saying, no, I don't want to continue this. Obviously, it takes conscious repetition and change and focus. But again, anything can become a habit as long as we continue it. So I love that. And I know that I feel like we're going to talk for like 3 hours. I know we're running out a little bit on time. So there's one thing two things I wanted to end off with. One is to really focus on the healthy microbiome. So what we can do to promote that first question is, what does that mean to have a healthy microbiome? And how can we know that we have a healthy microbiome?
Yeah, I mean, it means to have a healthy microbiome. It's strong and intact. It's wide diversity of things. You don't have burning, bloating, itchy sensations happening. Like it's definitely this balanced thing. To keep it balanced, that comes from understanding your nutrition routine, right? Like your nutrition routine is going to feel different than mine. I need a little bit more carbs based on my activity level. I eat animal protein. Do you? How does that look? You know, we got to be able to play around with that and be able to openly experiment when things come in that nature, but do not stick to the same foods. Whether it is you stick to the same foods every single Monday, but that's fine, but like don't, not the whole week. You know, if you feel comfortable in routine, I know a lot of people like to meal prep, totally cool, but keep it diverse throughout the entire week so that you keep rotating things in. Pick a new vegetable every single week. You know, like go to the store, like, what is this? Aubergine. Awesome. What can I do with it? Google and like play with it and see how it is and make it a game and do something like that. And then what was the second part? I forgot.
So how can we know that we have a good gut health microbiome? And then really, what can we do to promote a healthy microbiome? I know we talked about variety, but I think there's this sort of battle between like, I mean, in every aspect, the paleo and the keto and the low carb. And I think we're also demonizing low carb for gut health too. And it's a very controversial topic, but for me,
Yeah.
I fell into that and I went into the high fat and the PCOS and sorry, I'm just gonna have to put mute. There we go. Sorry.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
you're fine.
so this for me, I just wanted to end off with a point for the different diets. For me, I think, again, it's not like one size fits all, but it's very, very essential that we are getting enough fiber because the prebiotics fuel our probiotics. And I never reached like a really optimal level of health until I started to actually not be scared of carbs. We're talking the healthy ones, obviously.
Yeah.
While obviously kind of maintaining like a Mediterranean type diet with, with the healthy fats, the healthy proteins, the good animal products. But I also was able to train my gut to actually tolerate more carbs because when I did at the beginning, bloating, stuff like that. Now I eat a tremendous amount of plant foods and I don't have any reaction. So what is your opinion on that in terms of like diet promoting the microbiome?
Yeah, there's a lot on, especially I think with our generation, it's a lot on the big carb, low carb keto thing because we all lived that. I don't know anyone that hasn't tried that, honestly. And it does take time to add carbs back in. I see a lot of my clients, they're like, "Whoa, I can eat carbs," and it's like, no, no, no. And they're like, "I'm so bloated." And I'm like, because you just jumped into lava without even prepping yourself. Like, whatever, you can do what you want, but you're going to sting your hand and then you're going to get afraid of it. So you got to do it slow and integrate it into, if you're like zero carb right now, you got to slowly add it in. But same thing as you just said, I'm huge on carbs, especially when it comes to gut health, actually, which is the opposite of what you see. But when it comes to our liver, she needs carbs. Otherwise, she's going to go into gluconeogenesis and she's going to have to start eating herself to produce glucose in our body, which means she can't focus on detoxification, which she needs, especially for women with PCOS. You need her to do that for your estrogen levels. Like you can't, it's just, I know so many women that go keto because of it. And it's like, please don't, you need carbs, you need carbs, yeah. And our cells repair on carbs, right? Like that's fuel, that's how they do it. And they, they autophagy, and that's a huge male dominated thing people do. Again, all those studies are on men, postmenopausal women, and rats, which I assume your audience is none of those things. So we have to actually look at the science behind these things and who's conducting these studies and how it doesn't work. So carbs is a big thing, just like you said, quality proteins, lots of veggies, cooked veggies. Now I eat a lot of salads. When you're healing, raw foods are very hard for the body to digest. So what I like to think of with people, and just experiment it. Like if you don't like it, you don't like it, whatever. But we often only eat light foods, soups, salads, smoothies, yogurt. Like we stick to these kind of foods because they make us feel light, airy, fairy, all this kind of stuff. We're coming into fall. Try some root vegetables, some stews, some hearty foods that, yes, they keep you fuller, but they also keep you fuller because they're nutrient dense. Play around with that so that your body can actually replenish itself. And it's not to say like these light foods are bad, you can never have a smoothie. You know, like do what you want. But where can you add in more of these nourishing, hearty foods that do make you feel fuller and you might need to like sit for a second, but really is slowing down that bad? Like, I don't know, we've kind of been talking a lot about stress today. And adding these things in, play from there. Just make sure it's well cooked, you know, so it's easy to digest. It helps to pre-digest it essentially, so that your body can then get into homeostasis and kind of calm down. You can replenish the organs that need to be replenished. And then from there, by summertime, I bet you're going to feel quite banging. And then those salads are going to be totally fine.
I'm so happy you brought that up because yeah, it can be very rough for a digestive system to digest. And even in Ayurveda, they say that it dampens your digestive fire. It kind of puts out that fire, whereas the foods you're talking about, they kind of nourish that. They also create dampness in the body, which can promote all of these imbalances that we have with PCOS, hormonal imbalances. And I think it's also important to look at like the seasons, because in the summer, it makes more sense, the lighter foods. Obviously, also depends what you're dealing with, but the lighter foods, the fruit, like what's in season, what's local. And then when it gets to fall, like we don't really want a smoothie, like an ice cold smoothie, don't recommend. We want more of those comforting, rich foods, like pumpkin season is now, like, you know, take advantage of that. And so I think it's important to look at what is local, what's in season, and to kind of look at what is your body like moving towards. Like, are you feeling like you want something warm and nourishing? Then like go give that, because your body will give you signs. Two things I want to touch on very quickly, moving from the microbiome, is do we need probiotics? What is your opinion on that with supplements?
So I would definitely recommend talking to your doctor about it. One, because I've seen a lot of clients, they'll give themselves histamine intolerances because they went too ham and potatoes on the fermented foods, and it gave them a histamine intolerance because they went too much on the lacto or the bacillus, too far on it. And so, yes, but it's not your saving grace. You can't say you're repairing your gut just because you bought a cycle of probiotics. And the same thing is it's a supplement. It only helps you if you're doing the actual foundational work. And then also make sure that it's spore-based, it's well-researched, it actually has survivability and can get to your gut. And you only want to use them for one cycle, so 90 days. I know a lot of people will be like, I've been on this for 7 years. And it's like, wow, your diversity in your microbiome is not that banging. Like you only want to do 90 days. And then I personally, like right now, I'm not on any because I just finished referring cycle, and now I wait like 3 months and then I add some again. Like I play around with things because ultimately you want your body to have enough diversity. You want her to support herself, you know, without pumping yourself like a walking pharmacy. And so, yes, you can use them. Be smart. It's not candy. Do your research. It's still a supplement because you can actually make a lot more damage. And also make sure you don't have SIBO or any type of overgrowth or anything like that, because you could be feeding that bacteria and then you're stuck, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah, very highly by individual. We can't just like get anyone. I think there's a lot of cheap ones on the market too, where it's like, please buy, this is for any supplement, please buy a quality one, because it literally can be not helpful at all, or it actually could be harmful. So it's really important. And I think you definitely hit the nail on the head there. I think that when we're healing, usually there is cause for a probiotic supplement and more supplements, obviously strategic and, you know, looking at the dose, the quality. But kind of once we get past that, like the, you know, in the trenches healing phase, can you support yourself on a daily basis with like the diet? Because when we give our microbiome the food it needs, it will multiply and you know, proliferate and everything. So I think that it also depends what stage you're in. Like for me and you, it's probably like, well, our diet and lifestyle is maintaining that, unless we are like in a very stressed state, or we're traveling, or like we just can't eat optimally, or whatever it is. But again, by individual. So love that. And the last thing, unless we have any more questions that come up, I know we talked about this a lot, but for our listeners, because again, I think there's like a big emphasis on this. How do we really balance and manage when you have someone, whether you're working with them or you know that you need to be stricter during a certain time, and balance that with like the intuitive eating and just become more relaxed? Because again, we don't want to get into that like I'm such a control freak and I'm trying to control everything and I'm really trying to be really strict with it. But then that just puts you in like an overstressed state, right?
Yeah. Ask yourself, is this healthy? Like, and if you can't answer that yourself, and this was a hard one, like I was orthorexic for a very long time, and like I didn't know because quote unquote it's healthy. But you look at your relationships, everyone was stressed out around eating with me. I couldn't go out to eat without hyperventilating if I didn't get to look at a menu. I was always thinking about food. I was always obsessing. I was always Googling what is in what and what means what, like always obsessed with this thing. Be honest with yourself. That's not healthy. And it doesn't matter what diet you're doing at that time. That's why mindset is the foundation of our triangle of healing and happy, because that comes first over killing off these bacteria, killing all these kind of things. Like, what is your emotional response to food? And it's okay. Like, I still struggle with things from time to time. I still emotionally eat. It's a normal human response. I love chocolate when I'm sad. It's fine. But like when you intuitively know yourself, it's a lot easier. So, question that I've been asking myself over the last 5 years is like, who am I outside of health? Right? Like, what do I like to do? How do I slow down? How do I connect with me without my phone, without my work, without a diet, without anyone else? What do I like? Laura Patricia Martin, what does she like? When I asked myself that question, I was like, I literally don't know other than to answer the question with wine and going to the gym. I was like, wow, girlfriend, like that is not okay. And that's not uncommon. Like in my communities, that's often the case. We're busy moms, we're busy entrepreneurs, we're busy CEOs. Like, I don't have time to figure out what I actually like. And this is what leads us to identify with only foods and things like that. So, ways to practice that: journaling, yoga, 5 belly breaths before you consume your food. Like, it's not going to happen overnight. Intuitive eating is a lifelong journey, and you're going to mess it up a lot. And you're going to sit there, you're going to travel, you're going to eat too much in one place. You're not going to eat enough other days when you're super stressed with work. You're going to sit there, but you're going to be able to catch your thinking thought and be like, that wasn't my highest self acting in alignment right there. And that's okay. As opposed to only being reactive, and then you get home and it's like 8 p.m. and you're lonely and you're housing the peanut butter jar with the chocolates and the things like that. And you're wondering what to make of life and all this kind of stuff because you're on such a restrictive diet. It's like, if that's your thing, fine. But like when we slow down enough, we know when something's right or not. We know if something is intuitive. We know if something is self-sabotaging. We know when things are harming us, and we just have to be able to slow it down enough for ourselves to catch up. And so intuitive eating, surround yourself in community. Like, that is something that can't go. Like, being alone in that and doing that alone, you're not going to be able to catch your sick brain. You're not that you're sick, but it is your sick obsessive brain thinking in that way and kind of controlling you in a way and things like that. And this is why having a community, having sisterhood, having professionals is to sit there and be like, is that really your thought, or is that just the diet you've been on since you were 4 years old? Because we've all been on a diet since 4 years old and have witnessed eating habits, and we don't know how to trust our body because we're trained not to trust our body anymore. And so I know that was a super long-winded answer because there is no like right answer to that. There's no, do you truly believe you can intuitively eat? Like, there's this whole sexy movement on it, and I love the internet for this, but like, anyone, like, we get to this point where now I can honestly say like, yes, but I still overeat from time to time when I'm stressed, and I'm still eating banana bread because I'm anxious and it makes me feel good and I do it. And it's one of these things, but now it's like, I don't let my obsession about that banana bread because, oh my God, I didn't eat in between my 3 to 4 hour window and I just messed up my mitigated function, and oh my God, this is never going to work. Like, it's one of these things that it's like, no, I just know me, and I really wanted that banana bread because I'm anxious right now. And I know that banana bread isn't going to fix my anxiety or make my anxiety worse, but it is going to make me feel good right now. And now I'm going to move on to my next problem. Like, it's one of these things that we just learn more about ourselves. So figure out who you are. It doesn't have to do with the diet or what you go on or any of that stuff. what makes you happy? What brings you these feelings to yourself, whether it's tea on your balcony 5 minutes in the morning, or it's a walk in nature after work, or it's a bubble bath in the middle of the day. Like, what makes you actually trust you to take care of you? And that will eventually grow over time. But that's my best advice on that one.
Oh, preach. I love it so much. And yeah, I think awareness is key. And then it's like showing up for yourself every single day because you're not going to get it right away. And it's just a muscle that you continuously build on. And the forgiveness piece about, I could relate like 1,000 times where it's like, oh, I'm feeling a pull right now. What do I want to do? Like, okay, do I want to go this path, this path? And if I do the thing that's like, quote unquote, not the best option, I'm going to own it. Like, actually, I just want to do this thing and I'm not going to beat myself up for it for like years and years and years. So yeah, I just love that response. And if there's any other questions, please put them in the chat. But I would love for you to end off with letting us know how we can find you, because I'm pretty sure everybody listening to this will be obsessed and just want to find more of you. And also, if anybody wants to work with you, if they want to work more on, gut healing, what can they do to find you?
Yeah, so as everyone, I am most active over on Instagram, which is at it's ooh, at symbol it's Laura Patricia Martin. I realized when I used to say that to people, they would just say it, they thought that it was the at, so they were just typing in Laura Patricia Martin. No, you have to put ITS in the
Yeah.
beginning and then Laura Patricia Martin.
Don't worry, I'll
And
put the links so nobody has to remember this. They can just click on
perfect.
it.
Perfect. And then, I mean, from there, I do free master classes every single month because that's how I started, was just podcasts and YouTube and things like that. So I like to do that. And then we have like trainings, ranging from like $40 to whatever. And then we have like programs, and then we have one-to-one. But either way, you will see me on Instagram talking about all of them because I love them.
Amazing. Well, we will link all of that for you guys if you want to follow her. I highly recommend because you're amazing and I love this chat. And I'm just so thankful that you came on because I know this is going to help so many people. And yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.